Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is John Doyen. I'm the Executive Vice President for INSA. I want to welcome you to our session today on evolving alliances for a new era. We're excited you're here. A couple things before we get started. I do want you to notice that there's some cards, look like this, cards on your seat. If you have questions, you can use these cards to write down your questions, and we'll have some of our staff collecting them during the discussion, and then they'll be shared. That's how you get your questions up. Also, I wanted to give a big thank you to the sponsor for this session, which is 10X National Security, thanking them for their support to help make it all possible. And then I'd like to go ahead and get us started by introducing the panel. So let me see if I can, let's see, what order am I going to do this? I'll start with, we have Colonel John Mills. John is the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Cyberspace and Digital Policy from the State Department. Sitting next to him is Major General Retired John Howard from New Zealand. He's also the former Deputy Director for Commonwealth Integration at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Sitting next to him from Poland is Brigadier General Jarosław Stróżyk. How'd I do on that? Okay. He's the Chief Military Counterintelligence Service from the Ministry of Defense. And then the fourth panelist is Rear Admiral Mike Studeman, retired. He's on the Board of Advisors with National Bureau of Asian Research. And we're pleased to have as our moderator for today's session, the Honorable Milancy Harris, who's the former acting Undersecretary for Intelligence and Security at the Department of Defense. So Milancy, over to you and our distinguished guest for today's session.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists. I am thrilled to be here with you today and looking forward to what I think will be a pretty lively conversation about evolving alliances for a new era. Given the diverse perspectives and experience on today's panel and our theme, I'd like to start the conversation by offering each of you the opportunity to reflect on nation-state cooperation today through two questions. So we'll work our way down the line, but the two questions that I thought might tee us off well are, what are the most consequential changes you've observed in how nation states are cooperating to address national security issues? And what do you think they signal about the era we're entering and the challenges that lie ahead? We'll start with my colleague, Das Mills.
Well, thank you, Milancy. Well, we're obviously living in a different era, and it's with raging wars in Europe, tension in Asia from China, and really it is in many ways a trilateral world that we're living in. But I think one of the biggest things is just focus on national security spend. Now, I'm State Department now, even though I've many years in the Title X or defense world. But I think a lot of it is commitment to national security spend, and that's a key metric. Last year, we were just debating whether 2%, and frankly, many countries were not really close to the 2%. But now we're in a far more realistic and robust world of 5%, at least for NATO. 3.5 core, 1.5 enabling. But that's really, I think, the signal of what's going on, and what really constitutes a true partner is really contribution to national security spend.
Excuse me, thank you. I just flew in from New Zealand, so I'm still coming to grips with the time zone. Great to be back here, great to see friends. I think Dave, I just saw in the audience that we were talking about a haka a while ago. So I'm a New Zealander, and I'll speak as a New Zealander, and I'm no longer serving, so I'll speak as a free citizen with a strong opinion. And I'd like to be quite candid if I can. So what I've come to realise over the last 3 to 5 years is a growing interest in national security outcomes and issues in the private sector that previously I had not seen. From where we sit at the bottom of the world, as a former Prime Minister once said, paused like a dagger over the heart of Antarctica, our threat has fundamentally shifted and changed. The threats that you talk about that we face in relation to China, Iran, DPRK, violent extremism, they haven't reduced, they've increased. And as a result, the discussions that I've been involved in are so much more complex, and it's really hard to get those complexities through to sometimes our political leadership, and I'm talking about New Zealand, even though I've got all those flags behind me. Getting the issue through with clarity, and what I was really heartened to see in February 22 was the speed at which we were able to declassify information in an attempt to create strategic deterrence, and how that was achieved against current policy settings. And policy was really pushed hard so that its messages could be passed. I think the challenge as we go forward will be how can we replicate that at volume and velocity to create even better effects.
Thank you, Milancy, and thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. I just flew from Poland, and from the place where some dynamic and robust changes, especially with military sphere, are happening. But of course, to give you the consequential changes, I have to start from the reasons why things are changing, especially in our region. I will try during my interventions today not to reveal any classified information. I'm still active, but of course to give you a first glance picture from Poland. Of course, I would mention three issues. The first one is of course war in Ukraine, which we count from 2014, not from 2022. Of course, the hot stage of 2022 is key at this stage. But it happens that I used to be 10 years ago a defense attaché of Poland in DC, and I was going back and forth to many places, to include Congress, Department of Defense by that time, to give our reasoning. Of course, I was partially successful by that time. So still discussing the percentage of our budget, we are now spending 4.7% of GDP, which is really high effort of my country. The second issue, the second reason is coming to the topic of our panel. Of course, the Indo-Pacific shift of US, that's very important for my country. And the third one, strategic autonomy, or the ambitions of some European nations with this regard. So we have to look at those three issues and the consequential changes because of that in our region and in Europe, of course, some other places. We are looking for strong and reliable partners. I have to say, of course, that NATO stands still from our perspective, but we cannot neglect any bilateral and new possible partners or alliances. The second one is the elevation of disinformation nowadays, and this is the issue that we are very much observing in Poland and trying to combat this issue. And the third one, we need a robust information sharing, something we are discussing at NATO for the last 25 at least years. And the third one, of course, the fourth one, the last one, we need a very strong political, military, and industrial cooperation, of course, to include our major partner, US. And I will stop with that. Thank you.
Great.
Good afternoon. It's great to be on the panel with old friends and new ones here, and great to see so many familiar faces out here in the audience. I think I might start, because I think context is everything, by just describing how I've begun to think about the geopolitical environment. And I have this little thing called the dangerous Ds, and I describe kind of these macro trends, which I think it's important to get right before we start talking about alliances or changes. And the first D is destabilization. The second one is deglobalization. The third one is disintegration, old ways of doing business, new norms, new networks. And then you have disinformation, and then you have depopulation in advanced societies. And so given all of those things, you have a world under stress. And there's not a safe country out there. Everybody is grappling with how to deal with all these macro trends. And I think what you found, people have concluded, probably accurately, that the old ways that we would be able to deal with these things are insufficient to need today. And so people are looking for how to deal with these big challenges, and they are tired of, committee work or things that move too slowly or never get the job done, or in many cases, the organizations are actually occupied by your adversary, right? That can actually co-opt and subvert from the inside, and so you don't get anything done. So the question is, what new structures need to build on the old? And the question is whether or not to abandon the old altogether, or if they still have agency, you maintain an investment in the old because they have some legitimacy and they have some effectiveness still associated with them, and you don't want to give them up potentially to an opponent. But what are the new structures that also are going to be fit for purpose? And we're not just talking about the security elements, we're talking about the climate change elements, the economic, the trade, space, health, those kinds of things too. And you can read countless articles now about, mini-laterals, which is, I think, the new way to add to the lattice work of the old system. International bodies, the traditional alliances now have as option sets more bilaterals, trilaterals, quadrilaterals, and so on and so forth. And you're seeing them proliferate not only on the red side or the adversary side, right, as they work new defense arrangements, think Russia, North Korea, Russia, Iran, new economic organizations which are designed to exclude the West that China has been leading all around. And you also have the blue side also looking to say, I need to create small pockets of cooperation that can get things done in the timelines that are truly going to be relevant. And I think that there are lots of examples of what those mini-laterals look like. And I think that they are now augmenting kind of the old. And so I think that you're going to have an amalgam, a very complex set of relationships that exist out there, many of which are going to give countries more flexibility. Maybe you're only going to be operating on certain things for a certain amount of time. But to me, this is sort of the new format for how interstate relations are going to develop and mature in the 21st century.
Amazing. You guys have set the table for such an interesting conversation. I think where I'd like to take it is to ask General Howard to reflect on those remarks and think about how the traditional alliances are adapting to this new world order. As our Five Eyes rep here today, are the traditional structures adapting to keep pace with this? And where do you see opportunities for those constructs to really embrace change?
Okay, so I'd fully agree with what Mike said in relation to the changing nature of coalitions. The structures that we have leaned on for so long still offer value, but I'd challenge them to move faster than the traditional pace of going into another workshop or into another plenary discussion to say what might good look like. We need to move and create information sharing policies, information sharing culture, and technologies at the speed of mission, threat, and relevance. So by that I mean we need to drive harder against the status quo. And we should be questioning that each and every day because the threat is becoming more complex. I think the challenge really is to accelerate from what we've currently got and then to work out what good will look like, not tomorrow, but what I call the coalition after next. We tended, if we think back to when my good friend who just came in down the back and I, Bob Sharp, we were down in CENTCOM and we had 60 nations in the coalition village. That was what we thought was a coalition, and we were trying to project political and military force, and there was a lot of, as Clausewitz would say, a lot of friction just to get something to occur. we should have learnt from that. We need to become a learning organisation from a coalition point of view, and we need to drive into the coalition after next. And by that, I think the opportunity is more embedded for integration. Liaison is great, but it doesn't get you into the heart of the problem. And if we can integrate and seek out and bring partners who may not traditionally have integrated roles, find the talent, bring the talent in, and allow them to really thrive. And then we would have a non-traditional coalition that would move at the speed of relevance.
Very good. I invite all of you to jump in if there are responses to any of your fellow panelists, but I think I would turn to General Stróżyk to ask how Poland's thinking about this in this emerging environment. How are you thinking about new partners, deepening your relationships, particularly given the challenges, in the Indo-Pacific?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this question. We are, as I indicated in my previous remarks, we are very much looking at NATO, at our alliance, at how it's adapting. And it's adapting quite well, especially on the intelligence side. It's changed a lot in recent decade. It's created a new position of Deputy Secretary General, naming him Assistant Secretary General for Intelligence, regrouping military and civilian intelligence together. So that's something we are quite pleased. Speaking to your remarks about CENTCOM and the village, the coalition of the which was very high in numbers. It happened, I was there for 1 year and a half. And I don't believe too much in 60 nations coalition, I would say. This is something which is quite politically correct, but in terms of efficiency, could be better, I would say, in diplomatic words. And the numbers really count. When I started my first tour at NATO, Poland was joining NATO. There were 16 nations. There were then +3, Poland, Czech Republic, and Hungary. Now we have 32, which is quite high number, of course, but NATO still has to adapt, of course, but we are still reactive, I would say. And perhaps one day we will be kind of offensive, adapting ourselves, not only reacted to the things which are happening in Russia mainly, of course, but we cannot forget that China has been mentioned for the first time at NATO strategic concept, so perhaps one day it could be also the tool for that possible threat in the future. So in Poland, we are looking at new, of course, possible changes in terms of new alliances. We have so-called old V4 format with Czech Republic, Hungary, and Slovakia, but I would say recently there are some disputes between Poland and Hungary with regards to Ukraine. So then again, we are cooperating quite strongly with Germany and France. Of course, a separate channel with UK. So we are quite eager to look into new possibilities.
Very good.
I would add a couple of things. I do think that the New World Order has yet to settle out. We're in a transition phase. And the issue, I think, is about any coalition of the willing. There's a really key word, that will is part of that. And if you look like you are wavering, right, then it's very clear that opponents will take advantage of your lack of desire to commit fully to something. And these are the things which are now being judged. And I don't think we know exactly what the answers may be. Judgments about us versus European partners, us versus, West Pacific partners, maybe in South Asia, and them all looking back at the United States too, and saying, I am unclear as to whether or not the American will exists on issue X, Y, and Z, right? So I do think that we are undergoing dramatic change. It has been accelerated by adversaries like Russia and China who see opportunity left and right. Some are more circumspect than others, China versus Russia. But they see an opportunity and they are striking while it's hot. And so what you find is this pushing and this probing of these formerly blue coalitions to determine whether or not we will actually have strength that meets strength. And we're not just talking about manufacturing and our defense industrial base. We're talking about political strength. We're talking about the strength of our publics, right, to be able to back policy choices. And right now, if you're looking at others looking at us, I mean, we have to be very honest about this. We don't know where, you know, our president may be on certain issues, right? And so Japan doesn't know, right? And the Philippines don't know, and NATO may not know. And so this period of uncertainty where we don't deliver what people need, which is fundamentally about trust. Your trust, your credibility, that buys you, you know, deterrence capability. You have a capability, you communicate it, and you have credibility. In each one of those areas, there are question marks that exist. And I think that you're going to find that the red side will exploit all of those to the maximum degree, but they will halt when they meet something that they can't get around or they can't get through. And so the question is whether or not, you know, we will have these coalitions that are truly of the willing, that have the will and the staying power to maybe escalate, not just de-escalate all the time, but escalate because there's something very important that requires us to fight, you know, to the last on whatever it is. And I think because it's been brought into question, that you have a sort of this slippery, you know, calculation that's occurring in many capitals about where they should hedge and where they should align themselves.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting situation. A lot of the American strength used to be measured in just pure military, but that's not the center of gravity of America. It's our economy. And with the hollowing out of manufacturing, the exporting of jobs, the destruction of American society through globalism, a lot of our strength evaporated, and it's been illusionary for 30, 40 years. And so a lot of this is really more in the modern era. We need allies, and we need good nations, trusted nations, but we also expect our good friends to carry their fair share. And there's, frankly, since the end of the Cold War, there's been just a massive decline. And again, one of the core concerns in America is just the absence and the exporting of jobs, which in the old world was looked at as a good thing. We now see that actually weakened America. And so a lot of our focus is not giving away free stuff anymore. We don't have it. A lot of it is we want trade, not aid. And this is a good counter to what China is offering. Because really, when you look at all this, all roads lead to China. And that's really what is creating the friction in the world. Russia would not be in the game in the war in Ukraine if it wasn't for support from China. They could argue, people say it was Iran. Well, where does Iran get all the machine tools from? Where does North Korea get all the machine tools from? It's all China. It's all China. So there is an evolving world, and we absolutely need trusted partner nations, but they have to carry their own weight. And that's what we want. We want to see skin in the game. And so the old world is gone, and just America giving away free stuff. We want to participate and provide a tangible counter to China. And a lot of it is trade, and that's a revival of American manufacturing. We've now seen the cost of just pushing that all overseas over the last few decades. It hollows out a nation, and so that's what we're focusing on.
Well, as the four of you have worked across multiple capitals in your esteemed careers, I think my question in response to this conversation is a lot of that takes time, right? Each individual government will take time to make the investments, to grow industry. It will take time to grow the economy you're talking about. What are the trade-offs in the near term? Are we able to operate across theaters? Can we be responsive to the dynamic threat environment that has been referred to several places here today? You know, what do we do while that is developing, while countries are coming?
Well, again, you know, the true strength in what President Trump is showing is the power of the economy and the power. We are the largest economy in the world. Let's start acting like it. For some reason, for 30 years, we've acted like we're a smaller economy. That is, we still have immense economic power. And yet, president after president have failed to use that. And again, I just point to the last year, the big hurrah at the NATO summit was suddenly, in the last 5 minutes before the NATO summit, 22 of the 32 nations had reached 2%. Now, I would say there was some creative accounting going on there. Suddenly, but oh, no more, we can't afford any more than that. Now everybody's suddenly at 5%. We just needed new leadership. We just needed new leadership to bring that magic number. Now everybody can afford 5% suddenly. So these things are important, and using our economy as the center of gravity, not just constantly projecting military force all over the world and an umbrella over everyone. It's actually our economy, and that's what's important.
I don't subscribe to those views. I think that, we have our own interests and we pursue them with all instruments of national power. But I also believe that, simply going transactional or tariffing, these things drive our friends away. And you can see India just sent troops to be part of Zapad, with Russia and Belarus, and they're hedging, clearly with Modi going to the parade in Beijing. We've lost, years and years of investment in that relationship, which had some elements of counterbalancing. It wasn't going to be the perfect counterbalancer. But, we have to be careful of overusing any one instrument, right? Because this stuff will have a backlash, and it's already showing up the limits of your power. And so you can squander a lot of that trust by simply going into an extraction state here using your economy. So are we trying to win friends, or are we trying to, repel, friends here? You can't separate out, a very, very strong move like tariffs from the overall relationship. They aren't divisible. They are actually interconnected, and people make judgments about whether or not they want to work with the American side or not. And once burned, they're going to feel those scars for a long time to come. And we have to realize that there's a bunch of intangibles here, not just a bottom line on whether or not we increase the stock of 3 companies in the United States, but whether or not actually we're earning friends that allow us to actually deal with those big, complicating macro trends that I talked about.
If I may add from the Polish perspective, and I would say like that, my career always linked quite hard to the US. I was trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, exactly 30 years ago. And we always looked at US, at your values, at your friendship. Of course, we understand the economy. Polish economy is doing quite well. But at the end of the day, this is the trust and the credibility between the soldiers from the lowest level to the highest level. But of course, the military doesn't do all, and we know that we need also a heavy and much better cooperation between our industry, to include, of course, military one. We have invested a lot in our military. We have invested a lot in some new equipment, especially from US, and we acquired billions for your beautiful equipment, I would say. So that is the perspective from Poland, and we always believe in values.
So, to give us the perspective of a much smaller nation, so New Zealand is the size of the city of Melbourne, population-wise. Our GDP is 1/3 of US defence annual operating budget. And often we are quite openly declared as strategically irrelevant, unless we're talking about rugby, and we're not going to have that discussion. It's a really challenging issue, and I completely agree. A nation must do what it should for its own national interest. But when the shared interests align, then we can move faster and do things. The example I'll give you was the recent deployment of a Chinese destroyer group into the Tasman Sea. Unannounced live firing between New Zealand and Australia. Now that's 1,000 miles of cold shark-infested water, but to turn up and start live firing with a very capable platform is a signal. And you don't need a PhD to understand what that signal is. To be able to counter it and do something and spend more than 1% of GDP, then a democracy needs the social license to actually vote. And that is challenging in my country. Frustrating for me, having lived here and enjoyed the protection that the US has given many nations. And some of that is lost all too quickly on a social media post. So the reality of having that deep political discussion and saying we need combat capability. If there is a surface combatant there, you can't go out there with your logistics sustainment platform and have a meaningful discussion. So strategic deterrence and shared strategic deterrence. Your question earlier was about how might we craft statesmanship. How would we do that if next time the combatant comes down, it's one of 4 flat decks that may be out there? I think there's 3 afloat inside the first island chain. What will that look like in 24 months? Do we have 24 months to craft policies to share information? And I note the chairman of the NATO Military Committee came to the Southwest Pacific. Now, you've got to ask yourself, the reason NATO exists is not to come down into the Southwest Pacific. There is a deliberate decision at the ambassador level in NATO.
If I may add, speaking about time, I based also upon the remarks from General Phillips for the key speaker during our luncheon. That is something which really changed the dynamics. And I give you one example, very, very tangible one. When we bought your Patriot systems a couple years ago, we started to train our soldiers at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And it was intended to be a year and a half, 2 years, depending on your specialty. And when the war started in Ukraine, and the Patriots, fortunately, were given to Ukraine, the training took 6 weeks. So this is something that we have to look across the board, our structures, our training, our capabilities to include NATO, perhaps to include the decision-making process at ambassadorial level, and military committee, which are represented by the chief of general staffs. So the timing issue is also crucial for any preparations.
My sense is that the bureaucracies that have sustained alliance networks and new coalitions, they will continue to do the right thing. And they sort of understand the world as it is, and they're free of politics, and they generally have clean information or have the ability to actually filter and understand really what's going on. And we can count on them to see us through maybe some of these challenges as political leaders come and go. At the same time, it's better if you have alignment between all the political engagements and then what is happening kind of in the behind the scenes, perhaps with some less senior people. And combatant commanders are less senior people than what the White House or the cabinet would issue. When you have confusion, when it looks like you have different signals being sent from the very top versus the bureaucracies that are sort of doing the day-to-day, then that's harder for the bureaucracies to sort of compensate for over time. I think we've actually done it pretty well. I think we've seen our way through, and I think it's true not just in the United States, but other governments too, that you find that if you dig deep, no matter how volatile the situation, maybe ROK in Japan is a good example, those intelligence leaders were sharing continually throughout. It was too important for us to forego the intelligence relationship, right? And the US right there ensuring that the flows continued. And so I think the alignment between the political class and the rest of the government agencies that are doing the work should be there, and I think that's stressed right now. I think we'll be able to, see it through. I want to make another comment, though, that we can't just be thinking in terms of having the strength to work together to deter, right? I think we've overused the word deterrence. Integrated deterrence to me is a very hackneyed phrase. You found, in the last few years that everybody's it passes the lips all too easily, and we didn't identify what we were actually deterring, whether or not we're talking about just the Taiwan Strait crossing, we're talking about an invasion of another NATO nation, right, somewhere in Europe. And this failure to actually identify what we mean by deterrence, I think has not served us very well. And the fact of the matter is these coalitions are very important to these bureaucracies, and the political commitment to them are very important because our adversaries will not be deterred. I mean, wise up. They're operating and moving. They're conducting political warfare, information warfare, economic warfare. You're at war, right? And so I'm not sure what we're waiting to deter and building up our strength. Is it only drones for a cross-strait crossing, right? Because I think we're misidentifying the nature of the conflict that we're currently in. We need friends. We need the friends to be united and to operate in the mode of trying to shape things hourly and daily and weekly, because we are having our adversaries present us with more and more disadvantages that we're finding it harder to mitigate, right? And so anyway, just a few comments there, but let's actually add to our lingo. It's not just about deterrence, it's also about assurance, and it's also about shaping every single day as if today's the Super Bowl, because that's how they think about competition in the grand rivalries of today.
Yeah, I'm a little curious about the word of bureaucracies here. I thought that was a negative adjectival expression here, so I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know if this is a shadow government here or something like that. I never thought bureaucracies. So depending on bureaucracies to do anything, I spent 40 years in government. I'm not sure, depending on bureaucracies to perhaps undermine the elected body here. I don't know. I'm not tracking on that. So, well, if I could finish, Admiral, here. We absolutely want trusted partners. There's no question of that, and it should never be questioned. But we shouldn't be illusional either. The Admiral mentioned India. I would love to have better relations with India. But India, despite sanctions by the previous administration and going back, has been consuming on the side sanctioned oil, and they got caught with their hands in the cookie jar on that. It's as simple as that. So too bad. I'm sorry. I would love to have better relations, and I think we're working on that with India. But at the same time, and sanctions don't work. There's a lot of talk about sanctions. There's sanction, and then there's sanction enforcement. Unfortunately, that's one of the problems here. There's been very little sanction enforcement. If we're going to put in a sanction, we got to enforce it, or it's worthless. And again, India is a great example of that. They got caught with buying gas and oil from sanctioned oil, but also China. And that's the challenge here because of an undersized military, because of a lot of it's because of our industrial base, especially our Navy. We can't enforce sanctions. India and China have been buying sanctioned oil for 5-10 years here. And it really took over the last few years, it's really taken a spike.
What I mean by bureaucracies is simply public servants that are professionals and aren't political appointees that come in for a short period of time. By political appointees become part of the bureaucracy, it's not simply a dirty word. We've actually, our strategic culture has suddenly started to malign the so-called deep state when they have good Americans trying to do right by their country, and they're servicing the American people and doing all the things that make a big society like ours go. They have the right kind of knowledge, they have the right kind of expertise. It's not perfect, bureaucracies can be streamlined, et cetera. Every leader I know who goes into a new command tries to do some of that streamlining and reorganization. But at the same time, we depend on our public servants to advance American interests, and we ought not to treat them as if they're the enemy.
All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to take us down a different path here, just because several of you referred to the importance of the defense industry, technology, the need to collaborate in new and different ways. Given the centrality of AI, the emerging partnerships across countries that are not part of, our traditional intelligence sharing relationships. Can you offer some reflections on how you're thinking about AI, technology, open source intelligence as enabling tools for the world today? How are we thinking about making sure that we are evolving the toolkits as we are evolving the partnerships?
Well, with AI, and that's been one of the most important things as far as an export strategy, is the American AI export strategy. We dominate. There's a magic 5 that in chip production, which is really the foundation of AI. It's Taiwan, obviously. It's Japan. It's the U.S., Netherlands, and then South Korea. We have some situations in South Korea, but it's first and foremost the chips. And that's what China wants, is those chips. They've spent billions of dollars trying to replicate the chip production, and they just haven't been able to do it. So that's a power, and that's leverage, and that's a tool. Obviously, there's large language models, and there's also the applications. But we feel that is a center of gravity to really, again, as a counter to the Silk Road, Belt and Road. That's a very attractive option and counter to that.
For sure. I think, my reflection is that I think it's changing the way we're thinking about, some of the foundational work of, working with allies and partners. And so I would offer, if the panel wants to reflect on that, how are we thinking about, collaborating in new and different ways? How are we thinking about integrating new technology amid the kind of emerging challenges of the day and new alliance structures?
Milancy, I would offer that the limitations of our partnership typically comes down to whether or not we can trust that when we share information, it can be protected. And this has been a major issue for every partnership. In fact, America with leaks has proven not to be able to protect some of the intel that we've gotten through our alliance networks too. So this is kind of a shared problem. And the question, Rob tried to answer that earlier, Rob Joyce, about whether or not, AI-enabled capability favors the defense or the offense. And the answer is, well, both are going to be, adopting it and growing. And if you're behind, if you're not on the leading edge, you're vulnerable, right? So how do you actually get into that mode where you're not on the trail edge of adopting that technology, but you're there learning with it and securing your networks? Because if you can't do that, right? And I do think AI is going to help us essentially give a lot of capability, rather than saying to, Japan, the Philippines, and other partners, let's say, we want you to grow a cybersecurity force that has this amount of skills, you can go to these courses and whatever. AI promises to actually be able to give them cybersecurity in a box to a certain degree, right? Where somebody else can be developing and improving that AI through machine learning, but you're giving away that capability so they can run on their networks to identify where there may be vulnerables. You're always hunting, you're always sensing, you're always nipping things in the bud. For example, files moving in the wrong place or exfiltration. And so I do think that is very promising. If we don't get that fielded, or if it's sluggish this way, I think we will still find that we're going to hit the left and right limits of what we can do in these networks, because ultimately that's the showstopper. If you can't protect information that we're going to give you, if it's going to go right over the enemy, we can't afford to just put it down a sieve, right? And so to the extent AI helps there, I think that can strengthen the partnership. To the extent that we're slow, then I think that it will be a drag on our alliances and our networks.
Perhaps I'd ask our partners here in the middle to offer some reflections on how you think it will impact interoperability. You were talking about shrinking training timelines. We're talking about trying to figure out standardized ways to work together, lessons from previous, collaborations. How are you seeing your countries think through this, emerging technology environment?
Yeah, first of all, there's changes in AI, cyber. I'm looking mainly from the disinformation perspective, which is key to fight some Russian influence, especially in Poland or perhaps some other countries. But this is key to success, how to fight and to use this technology changes with these regards. I would add one thing, because this is the issue for looking for new partners or going out of the box from traditional way of thinking. I am the chief of the military counterintelligence, which is called internal service. But so I should be in Poland all the time. But that has been changed. For the protection of information, for the protection of Poland, we need a robust collaboration with our partners. Of course, also in terms of new techniques, new possible applications and technologies. So coming back to the information sharing, which could be secured, the trust and credibility I mentioned before, was mentioned by my fellow panelists, is key to this aspect. But so the changes in my country are focused on those issues as well, and going out of the box thinking and trying to understand the reality as I indicated, to be ahead of our major enemy, not to react to his actions.
So I'd offer probably three reflections. The technologies that are now present across the intelligence communities and all of the nations that we work with are light years ahead of what we used to have, and I think this gives us the opportunity to think differently about the human in the intelligence cycle, the process, exploitation, dissemination aspect. If we're able to collect for release, given that collect may be machine-based, if we can start with that mindset, then we can get straight into write for release, which should speed up information sharing. If policies don't allow that, then we have a problem. The way that I used to describe it when I worked at DIA was the only way to fix an ailing patient is to give the patient CPR to stop it terminating. CPR, culture, policy, risk. Culture will destroy everything. And if the culture is, I must start with secret, no foreign, and if I'm writing and I don't have the authority to change that caveat, then how am I making the boat go faster? I'll use the sailing analogy because there's a couple of sailors in the room, and I'll use the America's Cup. And the America's Cup has at times not lived in America. The way that New Zealand took it with Sir Peter Blake was innovative and culturally driven, and he had one mantra carved in a piece of wood where the boat lived. If what we do today does not make the boat go faster, why are we doing it? If what we do today does not make the boat go faster, why are we doing it? As an analyst, if you are unable to write at the speed of release, if there is a human in the process who is slowing that down, then the policymaker and decision maker may not be able to have the engagement with an international partner or a private sector partner. So somehow we should use the technology to drive that culture, and we should be quite clear about where is the risk. Now, the risk may be that you've got something from me and I don't want it shared, or you've given me something and we don't want it shared, or it may be a third party and we're not quite sure what to do with it because we're still having policy discussions. We need policy that is information age-based, intent-based, and people need to have the confidence and authority to say, well, I will share, as opposed to what may or may not have happened where I went to my friend and took the top off the document and gave it to him when we breached. And then afterwards either I got the document back or we burnt it, or I'm not saying that happened. But I know in an operational setting, sometimes people are forced to take risks, and we shouldn't put that risk on the individual. We should put that political risk where it needs to sit. That means culture, policy, and risk.
Building off of that, a lot of this will be dependent on industry-to-industry collaboration. And so I wonder if you could offer a few reflections on, your views on how we broaden in broadening that toolkit, there's the policy piece. How do we make sure we are having our intelligence organizations able to accomplish the mission with the latest tools? But a lot of that is dependent on the innovation space that's not within government. And so how are you seeing the partnership between industry and government from your various perspectives? I'm happy for anybody to jump in.
I mean, I think we've made some strides in this. If you talk to Trey Whitworth, he'll talk about Maven, tonight if he gets to the fireside chat. And we've had a number of different initiatives, different organizations within the Pentagon. We've struck some deals, inked contracts with a number of leading companies to be able to adopt this technology. The ODNIs tried to take it seriously, maybe moving too slow, but in some cases you really do want to be very careful with regard to what the technology brings and whether or not you put everything in one sock, right? Or whether or not you have sort of the HUMINT over here and the SIGINT and cyber over here. So there are arguments both sides with regard to security as well as performance with regard to these capabilities. So I do think we're getting along. I do think that there's even more opportunity here. I think that there are plenty of industry partners who totally understand the security aspects and are working very, very hard to deliver, what we need. So I'm very optimistic about how we're going to actually do this partnership going forward. And if we can ease up some of those impediments that used to make everything so darn sluggish, then all the better. Because new competitors, maybe small companies that have something new to offer, now also have a chance to be competitive, not just sort of the traditional primes.
I think it's also the agility of government, and we've talked about this for years, but it's the agility of government to consume and take in innovation from the private sector. We still have a requirements process that is challenging, and anybody who's been involved in that, speed is not normally associated with that, but taking in goodness from the private sector, that's one of the key things, and that's hard for government to do.
I think forums like this go a long way in providing an avenue for that type of dialogue. I think we've seen over the last probably 10 years some significant reforms on the U.S. side in how we're thinking about technology adoption and increasing the speed. I wonder if our colleagues from Poland have seen the same, or?
Yeah, we have seen the changes from your perspective, of course, but we believe that still there are some hurdles which could be taken away, I would say, or could be faster. Of course, I'm not speaking about U.S. bureaucracy, but anyway, I am a great advocate of cooperation, and I believe in Poland. Of course, we are very much like a younger brother of U.S. who is still learning, but the potential is there, and the cooperation between private, small, and medium companies. Of course, we have also our national industrial base, which is quite sluggish in some cases. So we saw those changes. I saw them by myself, but still I believe we need the cooperation not only within military, in military case, but also in some other on some other issues which build some relations, steady relations we need.
My experience is when someone sees a bright idea, they latch onto it pretty quickly. And it's not bound by geography or passport. New Zealand has a space industry, would you believe? Mm-hmm. Rocket lab. We're launching CubeSats as an industry. Yeah. Once you see it, if you're an operator, you'll go straight to the best solution. That is something I've seen throughout my career. The establishment of from Maven, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Centre, and what flowed from that was very impressive. And I keep looking at bright young people as we see outside, yes, doing some amazing things. And I walk down there and there's Jane's. We all grew up with Jane's books, yeah. And now the platform they've got is completely different and world class. But I still go to my book now and again because I'm analog.
We're old school.
But the young analysts these days can do such amazing things. Yeah. And they'll bring these ideas to you. We had a particular operation and a young corporal came to me with an idea and we let him run with it. And as a result, others went straight to that solution. So my sense is those that have to create strategic effect will embrace good ideas quickly.
That's great. That's actually a great note for for the revelation that we have run the clock out, gentlemen. We have just a few minutes left. And so I think, again, kind of thinking about those remarks, I'd ask for any final reflections you have when you think about looking 5, 10 years in the future. What will alliance building in this era, what does success look like? What are the things that we should be considering? Is it, new technologies? Is it new partners? Is it new power dynamics? What will success look like 5, 10 years from now? And I will go in this order down, and we'll let Admiral Studeman offer the final word today.
Okay, well, I hope it means a peaceful world, first of all, and that we have both our alliance partners and also trusted nations that we have created new relationships with, and first and foremost, again, with trade, because that's really trade and diplomacy. That's the way it should start and should be. So I think there's good opportunity here, and I just we are living in a very volatile world, and there is a lot of not just in Ukraine. That is just it is, and our Polish colleague here is feeling it directly, but there's a lot more around the world going on. So hopefully we will make sure there's no long conflict.
Great, thank you.
So I'm not expecting human nature to change. Mm-hmm. I'm expecting complexity and volatility, ambiguity. I would like to think that our shared values remain shared, and that we are still able to work through the big strategic issues that we know are in front of us. And in 5 years, when I hope to be doing more hunting and fishing and relaxing, that we're still not arguing about, can I release, must I may go asking my parents if I can. I'd like to see that we empower the young people that are here to be future directors of agencies, where they're not having the discussions that Bob and I used to have when we'd beat our head against the wall because it didn't make sense. So I'd like to see that happening, and I'd like to thank every American here for what you do, for those of us that have faith in that. So you recovered my dead and wounded on a battlefield. Thank you.
Thank you.
Speaking about changes in 5-10 years, we don't believe that Russia approach will change in that period of time. We haven't also believed that in the past. So just as I mentioned a couple times during my remarks, we strongly believe that still your respective country, USA, will be present in Europe. We believe that NATO will be strong, of course, stronger with the potential of European nations getting better in all dimensions. So just adapting to the new reality, but still the same threat from the East. And it's quite hard to find new partners, I would say, from our perspective. It's not that many nations all over the world. And still, from our perspective, and thank you for that, US is the key partner for Poland.
Thank you.
If we're not more astute about our statecraft and our place in the world, the United States, the center will not hold, and China will gain increasingly sway over the world, in my view. They have a vision for the future. We haven't laid out a vision for the world. We're certainly deconstructing parts of the vision out of frustration. That's legitimate frustration, but what do you put in its place? What is the vision that America and Washington will set out in crafting it with other allies and partners to say this is the world that I think we should aim for, and it should reflect kind of the reality of our times, which means it's going to be a more disintegrated world with different blocks and a multipolar world. I don't think we've seen that vision yet. It could come through a national security strategy, it could come through something else, but absent that, the Chinese have one, and they've been propounding it for a long time, right? And they're adding to it: the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative, and now the Global Governance Initiative, right? They are very good at pretending that they're not doing what they're doing, and they've convinced most of the Global South, in fact, that the winning formula is to be more closely aligned with China than with others. You have a strengthening red bloc, which has already made significant grounds. 140 countries that used to trade primarily with the United States now trade primarily with China. The world is being transformed under our nose. China will be the setter of standards because they are investing in people and international institutions and because they're developing the technology and harvesting it from our economies and all the rest. And so I sometimes have a very bleak sense of maybe where this could go. On our current trajectory, if we don't change course, then I think that we are handing a win to China because we will look unilateral, we will not look like the benign hegemon anymore, and it will be more economically attractive and maybe even from a security point to hedge stronger with Chinese, even amongst our allies, that you would never think would do that, right? At the very minimum, they could be playing a middle game, right? Rather than just being all on one side. And so if we don't wake up to this, we don't understand the geopolitical trajectories and the momentum that China has and the skills and techniques that they've used, their stratagems, that we're going to find ourselves in a much lonelier place going forward. And so I would just cast a warning to anybody that's still in the community, still in the government, that we're going to actually need to see the world for what it is and start acting as if we need friends to be able to create the world that we really want and keep those things that we want to, protect. Thanks.
Thank you very
China
much.
and Russia.
Well, thank you all for your thoughts today. We could go on for another hour, but I think we are freshly out of time per our moderator here. So.